Hello, everyone. My name is Gitika Gorthy, and today I am very, very excited and honored to be interviewing a very special space champion, Miss Sophia Jones. Miss Jones is a Stanford University student who pursued her bachelor's in physics with an astrophysics concentration and her master's in public policy with a science and technology concentration. She is extremely passionate about space policy, astrophysics, and economics, which are very different different realms and different areas, but she found a way to combine all of her passions together with her current career goals. Additionally, Ms. Jones is a volunteer for the National Space Society as a debate coach and will be a business operations intern at SpaceX this summer, and previously was a space policy intern at Aerospace Corporation and Space for Humanity. On top of all of that, she was previously a co-lead for the space policy team at Stanford Space Initiative and was an intern at NASA Ames Research Center. Ms. Jones has so many incredible experiences under her belt, and I'm so excited to learn more about what got her so driven about and excited about space policy. So welcome, Ms. Jones. Thank you so much for taking your time today to inspire the next generation. I'm so excited to have you in this call today, and I'm proud to call you a space god as well. So thank you for taking your time today to speak with us all.
Yeah, thank you so much, Gitika. I'm really looking forward to our conversation, and I think you're doing a lot of great work.
Thank you. Before we get into understanding your journey and your future outlook on the space industry, could you kind of start off by telling us a little bit about your typical day? I don't know if a typical day really exists, but how does your day usually run?
Yeah, totally. So since I'm a student, as you mentioned, every day is going to look very different. But on a normal day, I'll wake up pretty early. I try and get some exercise in before my morning classes. And then I have plenty of classes throughout the day with some time for sunshine and naps in between. I'm lucky to go to school in California, so I really enjoy being outside in between my classes. And then in the evenings, I'm just a regular college kid. I'll hang out with my friends. I'll get dinner at the dining hall, stay up late doing studying. I like to read a lot of space-related news and things like that, but that doesn't define my entire life. I'm also just a regular college student who does college student things. So I would say most of my days are some variation of those activities.
Yeah, you make it sound so simple, but yet it's I would say it's a very busy schedule because being a full-time student plus managing so many extracurriculars and being an intern is definitely sounds very challenging. So I applaud you for that. And like I was mentioning in your introduction, you do have so many internships that you are a part of. And I'm curious, if you had to pick one internship experience you've had so far, what do you think is your by far your most favorite experience? And could you share maybe some exciting research you might have conducted or been a part of?
Certainly. So I think right now the internship that stands out to me the most as being by far my favorite was my most recent year that I spent as a space policy intern at the Aerospace Corporation. And that was a really fantastic internship for a number of reasons. One of the first is that the mentorship there was just phenomenal. So I felt like I had a lot of flexibility in what I was working on. The mentor was very great, and I just loved the people that I was around. I also really enjoyed being a part of a space policy think tank like that because I was constantly surrounded by these really great ideas and great papers that were coming out. And it was a great way for me as a student who was still sort of entering this industry to get a lot of exposure to the space policy all at once. And you've mentioned that I'm sort of interdisciplinary because I have the technical field and the technical aspect of myself where I'm interested in physics, as well as the non-technical aspect where I'm really interested in political science and economics. And so I think a project that stood out to me while I was there was that I had the opportunity to brief the team on how we can be better incorporating math into the papers that they were writing. And that went two ways. It was both for the authors who identified as being less technical and wanted to introduce math into their writing more, as well as the other side where there were more technical writers who might have been using mathematics in a way that was less accessible to other people in the industry. And so being sort of a translator between those two communities has been a really part of who I identify as. And the ability to sort of teach other people who are doing space policy for a living how they can better communicate between technical and non-technical people was a really exciting project that I got to do.
Yeah, I can definitely see you're so excited just talking about it. I can just imagine that it was a phenomenal experience. And, I'm kind of curious, through your internship experience there, did you discover anything you didn't know about space policy before? Something that might have kind of excited you to continue your endeavors in space policy?
Right. I think the majority of my learning about space policy in general honestly came from this internship. And it was a little bit difficult because, at universities, at high schools, space policy isn't really a typical curriculum. So I was pretty limited to what I was seeing the most often in the news and on social media and things like that about space. But being exposed to all kinds of space policy, from the defense aspect to the scientific aspect to cislunar activities, just like understanding how many different kinds of space policy there are and how many pockets of the space industry need attention, was really useful and meaningful to me. So I would say the amount of knowledge that I went into the internship with about space policy was so small compared to how much I left with. And so I think, like, to answer your question, I really did just learn about everything. And now I think I have a much better grasp on what exactly the space sector looks like from like way up above, and how space policy plays into each of those corners of the space sector.
Yeah, I had no clue that there were different like pockets inside of space policy. I knew it was a very like vast topic, but I didn't realize it was, you could specialize in a specific small group. So that's actually really interesting to learn about. And you were mentioning how space policy, you're not going to find like a degree, for example, saying, "Oh, I'm going to major in space policy," and not yet at least. So I'm curious, how do you pursue those interests at college? Like, maybe for students who are interested in interdisciplinary type studies, would you recommend something that you're doing currently? I know it's very difficult because you have like a set curriculum to achieve your degree right now. But I'm curious, like, how are you trying to manage this as a college student, taking the required classes, but still also trying to kind of get those classes you would need for your real life career that you are hoping to get into?
Right. I think one of the beauties of space policy, and more generally the areas of the space sector that are less geared towards engineering and computer science and like pure research, the beauty of that is that there isn't really a specific track that you have to take in order to get involved in it. You can major in English, you can major in economics, you can major in international relations, but you can also major in things like math, engineering, aeroastro, those kinds of things. And I think that's part of the reason that I enjoy being in space policy so much, is because there's such a vast diversity in the ways in which people became part of space policy. I've worked with people who have come from all different kinds of backgrounds, but just purely by their interest and motivation to continue to be involved in space policy, that's really the deciding factor for what got them there. So I agree that it's a little bit tough as a student right now to get involved in some of these less typical, for per se, areas of the space industry, because we're so used to associating space with like pure engineering. But I also think that's one of the beauties of it, is that like for me, I was able to study physics, which I'm like deeply passionate about. And I was also able to study public policy, which is not only something that I like, but also something that's practical. And so I was sort of able to marry those two majors together into something that leads me into space policy. But that's certainly not the only way to do it. And I think that at the end of the day, what really puts someone in a good position to become part of space policy as a student is just loving it and doing it and reading about it. And you don't have to major in a specific thing or go to a specific school, but the least you can do is just like expose yourself to those topics and really be engaged with them. And I think that's the best pathway to get there.
Yeah, I think you bring up some really good points there. I think the first part where there's so many ways to get to like a final destination. You were mentioning various degrees you could pursue in relation to politics or government, even English in order to get into space policy. And I think that kind of opens the eyes for people to be like, oh, wait, I can pursue this degree, which is really different from what you might expect. So definitely so many different paths you can get into an industry, but also you mentioned kind of going outside of the curriculum. So like, you found many internships that kind of helped aid you in the process. Same thing, just looking for mentors, finding those real world experiences or reading research papers, or in your case, it would be the news, just like trying to make yourself more aware of what's happening could take you a long way. Because you were saying most of your space policy knowledge came from that internship. So I think, real world experiences truly have value.
Totally. Yeah, I agree. I think that there's so much that people can do to engage outside of the classroom with even things like you're doing with workshops and various webinars. There's YouTube channels, there's books. And I think that, those are the best resources for somebody who's trying to come into the space sector from the angle that I'm coming at it.
Yeah, and there's just so many people out there who are so willing to help. I mean, I am interested particularly in space medicine or aerospace medicine. So I know that's also a very unique path with combining medical industry with space and understanding like the physiology of astronauts. And I've found like 3 or 4 mentors who have provided me incredible research experiences related to aerospace medicine, which I would never have gotten without them. And some of my teachers, they asked me in school, they're like, oh, is that a real career? So I know that definitely there are no opportunities like that in my school. So it's nice to know that there's just so many people out there who are doing what you want to do, and you can probably find like a mentor who can help you with that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think mentorship is a really big part of becoming any like thing that you want to do in the space industry, becoming that person that you want to be in the future. That's really great that you found a mentor too.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, definitely. Mentors are amazing. And, kind of getting a little bit away from, your daily life and what you're involved in, I'm actually really curious about like what got you into space, because I know space policy is super unique. It's very niche, and you also have a passion for physics. So I'm kind of curious how you got into this. But before, could you kind of tell us what was the moment that inspired you, or kind of was the moment when you're like, I really want to do this as my career, or I want to get into the space industry? Can you kind of share your, start of your journey?
Yeah, I think honestly, I can answer both of those questions sort of in the same blurb here. And I'll start with the fact that when I was in high school, I was interested in physics and political science kind of separately. So on the one hand, I really enjoyed calculus and I liked learning about astrophysics, and I was gravitated towards that study, no pun intended. And then I also was really interested in political science. I was on the varsity debate team. I really enjoyed economics. And when I got to college, when I started at Stanford, I didn't really realize there was an overlap. And so I thought that I had to choose. So originally, I decided to go with the physics path. I figured that I would eventually get a PhD and go into research or possibly academia. But that was sort of the way that I saw myself moving forward through my academic career. But then my freshman year, two experiences happened that sort of were the aha moments for me. The first and most important was that space policy team that you mentioned from the Stanford Student Space Initiative. And when I went to that first meeting, I immediately knew that space policy was something that I thought was really interesting, really cool, and I did not know existed. And so I think that first meeting, we talked about something pretty general, like what would you do if you could go to space and you were a citizen? Like, would you jump on a trampoline? Would you take pictures? Like all kinds of things. And I realized that space policy as a whole is just this consideration of what are we doing in space, and how do we get there, and how do we regulate things, and how do we pass bills, and how do we pass laws that can help us really create a space industry that's right for humanity. And so I figured this is really, really interesting. And I think that this is something that I like a lot. And I was also at the time interning with NASA Ames Research Center down the street, and I was doing software development there. And that was a very technical internship. It was purely coding, and I was doing some application of different web design. But I think what was like really important was the juxtaposition of my experience as a technical intern with my experience with space policy. And I realized if I want to be a part of the space industry, I like the space policy a lot more. I felt like that to me was a really meaningful way to be involved. Not that doing the coding and the engineering, that kind of stuff isn't useful, but it wasn't for me. And so early on, I'm very fortunate to have had an experience like this so early in my career. I really realized that space policy was something that I wanted to do seriously. And so I started thinking about, okay, do I minor in public policy? How do I take more economics classes? How do I get more involved? And I was probably going through a lot of the motions that people who take non-traditional paths towards the space sector do too, which is there isn't a major for this, and I'm not really finding a lot of textbooks or resources. How do I put myself in the position to do this? And so from there, it involved a lot of like internship searching and a lot of reading and a lot of just like involving myself outside of the classroom in the study, because then eventually I developed enough momentum to sort of get started in space policy. I got the first internship, and then I ended up at the Aerospace Corporation. And so it's a gradual process, but I think that like devoting myself to learning about it on my own, and also realizing that that was a passion of mine that just like scratched both itches of the technical and the non-technical side of myself, really motivated me to just keep giving myself to space policy, because it was at the end of the day what I realized was my passion.
Wow, yeah, that's so inspiring. And I'm sure like so many people can connect with what you were saying. It's like, one of the things you started off with was you didn't realize space policy was a real career, which is probably most people in this, whole world. Whenever I mention some unique, interesting careers, even related to art in space or food scientist who works at NASA, people look at me like I'm crazy, like, oh, is that a real job? And I'm like, yes, it is. And that's, one of the things I love talking about with Ignited Thinkers is space careers, because I think we just just don't realize how space is like its own world. You would need every single job. Like if you need lawyers in the real world, you're going to need it in space. If you need an artist in the real world, you're going to need it in the space industry. So I just like to think like space is like its own little world where it needs every career. You can literally combine any job with space if you like it. So I really think you bring up that important concept of, realizing it's a career and how you can get involved in it, and just hearing how you've, made those experiences for yourself. I think it's really great advice for a lot of young students who are, hoping to become like you, because I think more than just sticking with the school curriculum, taking that step forward and putting yourself in uncomfortable situations where you have to grow is where you're going to discover if this is what I really want to do. So I'm glad that you're able to find those experiences and put yourself in this in that position. So thank you so much for sharing that. I know I took away a lot of points from what you were just sharing. It's a big learning experience.
Totally. Yeah. I hope that anybody who's listening to this knows that there isn't really a direct path into any part of the space sector, and that there is so much that you can do outside of the classroom, even like things that are free, like just looking at the internet or going to the library, that can really set you up for success and put you closer to doing what you are passionate about.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm kind of curious, when you were pursuing these different internships, because you've had these very broad experiences. I have heard like in previous interviews, people would mention some really shocking things or obstacles or barriers that kind of I never even expected. I, feel very oblivious to what's happening sometimes. Like a lady a few weeks ago, she was sharing how people would judge her based off of her hair color. And I know there's obviously going to be stereotypes anyway in any world, like perfect world. I feel like there's going to be assumptions that people make. So I'm curious, from your personal experiences, do you think that you've had any of those stereotypes or biases affecting your internships, or any like obstacles related to that? And also, if you didn't, maybe did you have any obstacles throughout your career path so far? And if so, how were you able to overcome them?
Right. I think that in general, like these obstacles and these barriers that will come up for people who are in STEM is something that can't really be ignored because they're true, they're a reality. And I am no exception to that. I think that, as a woman, as a daughter of immigrants, I'm a minority and I'm even disabled. I identify as a disabled student. There's a lot of different ways in which I've experienced things like microaggressions or just feeling like I've been treated differently, being talked over, not really being heard, feeling like ideas that came from me were thought less of just because they came from me. All kinds of experiences like that have come up in internships. They've come up in the classroom with my peers. And I think that that's something that's really difficult for people who are in the STEM sector at all. And one thing that's been really helpful for me to just sort of tune out that noise and focus on what I'm passionate about and what I want to do for a living is to find other role models out there who are probably further down their career than I am that I can really look up to. And I don't even have to be that close with them. Like I don't have to meet them for coffee every other week to know that like there's somebody that I truly look up to. There's so many different women in my network and so many minorities and others that I just feel like they demonstrate to me that there's a place for people like me in the space sector. And that's what really keeps me going. And so I think that, related to mentors is also just role models in general, finding those people, and it doesn't have to be a lot. It can just be like a couple that you look up to and that you think, this is a person who I really appreciate and that they motivate me to become part of the space sector, regardless of the fact that I might not be loving every single part of the experience getting there. That has been a really, really big lifesaver for me. And I think that, as I continue to go through my career, I'm going to still continue to find different women and different, people who I work with who I just think like, wow, you inspire me to stay here. And there's going to be things like imposter syndrome. There's going to be people who treat you differently, and that's never, ever going to go away. And so the best thing to do is just like lock in on those people who you like and that you look up to and really use that as fuel instead of, getting so bogged down by all the noise of everything else, because that's just, it's going to like deter you away. And we want like everybody that we can have in the space industry, regardless of who it is, like we want everybody here. And so like, just, yeah, finding those role models has been so important for me. Totally.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I feel like a lot of times we tend to cover up, personal experiences that might have happened. And I think it's so validating to hear people just share how, I've been in those situations, but I found ways to combat and overcome them. It's really sad that we still are in that position where we're facing it, but at the same time, we've come so far. Like you were mentioning, there were women, at NASA, like 50 years ago doing stuff, even though if they were looked down upon, now they're coming into light with like movies like Hidden Figures, but or like Rocket Woman, the book. And I know there's just so many movements going on to break that glass ceiling, and I'm really proud of that. But also just keeping up with your passions, but finding mentors you can look up to, or even really cool people. Like, for example, I know that I look up to Dr. Mae Jameson. She was the
Yes.
first African American woman in space, and she studied aerospace medicine. Like, she was a physician who went to space. And I think she's so cool, and she broke so many glass ceilings and a lot of stereotypes, and kind of took a step forward for a lot of the women of color, immigrants, just everyone in the United States, really. And I just wanted, just I think what you mentioned is really important. Look up to someone who's done something that you want to do and connect with them, and kind of that will provide you the confidence to keep going. And I think that's so powerful. And now that you've mentioned, I'm kind of curious, who are your mentors or role models that you look up to?
Gosh, there's so many different women in space that I think are just huge role models of mine. I think a few that come to mind, especially with respect to space policy, are people that I'm closer with. Gosh, Michelle Hanlon at University of Mississippi is a big one. I really look up to Charity Whedon and Luke Reisbeck at Astroscale. So many of the different women that I've worked with at CSPS, at Space for Humanity, at NASA, peers of mine at the Stanford Space Initiative. There are just so many different like women around me that I realize like, you are doing something really great and I really appreciate it. And so gosh, like those are just some people that come to mind first, but there are so many more. Like the list goes on and on and on. And I think even some of the space champions that you've interviewed before, I've seen on here and I've thought like, wow, those are people that I also really look up to. So yeah, there's just so many out there that I really, really appreciate. And then I think even if they don't know it, I look up to them in a really big way.
Yeah, and I just want to say, like, I think, what you're saying right now, I definitely want to look up to you, and I know that I will look up to you, and I do look up to you, because I think what you're just saying, as a young student, you've done so much. And I think a lot of times we associate age with, like advice or like role models. But I think, someone really young could also be very inspiring, because it shows people that, oh, I can also start young. I can also do things at like 20 and still be very successful. I can still be an intern at an amazing corporation like the Aerospace Corporation, do like, stuff with adults who have had like 20, 30 years of experience, and still have that voice. And I just, that your experiences, what you've shared so far, are definitely very inspiring. But also what you were mentioning, there's so many people around you who have that positive energy. And it's just a matter of recognizing that they're there for you and you can look up to them and lean on them when you need help. I think it's so important. So, thank you so much for sharing those mentors. I think finding a mentor is very important.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, and I'm curious, what was the most exciting or incredible experience in the aerospace industry that you've seen? It could be like a historical moment that you've maybe read about, or something you've witnessed in the aerospace industry, maybe something cool that you're looking forward to. I'm just kind of curious of what aerospace moments you're excited for. It could be space policy or not related, just anything related to aerospace. But I'm also curious what makes you excited and nervous for the future of the aerospace industry.
Right. I think that, it's a really exciting time to be a young adult or a student getting ready to join the space industry, because it really is experiencing this pivotal moment with the introduction of commercial as such a big player in the space industry. And I think that that's really pivoting what the space industry means to humanity and what it can do for us. And so I think that that's something that really, really excites me, because now not only are people who are kind of space nerds like us, but also people who are interested in making change and shaping what this looks like this is the time to join, this is the time to start. And so I think that's one thing that I just look forward to so much. But I also think that there's some concerns and some risks associated with that for sure. Thinking about how we really achieve a meaningful, sustainable, ethical balance between government activity and private activity. How do we make sure that there's room for everybody at the table from different countries? How do we avoid situations in which we're like taking advantage of space or space resources? There's a lot of different things that we have to consider now that the space industry is gaining this new wave of momentum that it didn't have before. And so I think that that's another reason why I'm so interested and passionate about being in space policy, is that I have a role in sort of shaping what that looks like, whether it's in a small way or in a big way. There are so many people who have like influence on how the space industry moves forward from here and how we achieve this balance between commercial and non-commercial activity. But I think that that's just something that's a huge change that our generation specifically is going to be a really big part of, because it's going to last for so many decades and we're going to be able to see it come to fruition.
Yeah, I'm definitely very excited about the commercialization because I think it's going to advance not only human travel to space or technology, and cheapen space travel, but also just the experiments that are being conducted, even just like going up to space for like 10, 20 minutes or even 3 days. Just that short experiment time you can have to do scientific studies, not as expensive as planning a mission to the ISS. I definitely think commercialization opens up so many different paths. It's very exciting, but also the regulation piece because I feel like every day, so there's this app, it's like a space launch app. So every day it tells you where, if there's a launch happening in the world. And trust me, there's something happening every single day at this point. And just seeing that makes me excited, but also like you were mentioning, it's who's regulating all of this? Who's keeping in track of this negative effect it's having on CO2 emissions, our planet, and what is happening to space junk? We just have to be very cautious about all these actions that we're taking, like you were mentioning. And this regulation, obviously, I think is a big part of space policy. And I'm kind of curious about your opinion on this. You totally don't have to have like the most solidified answer yet, but just from what your experiences are, I'm curious. What do you think is the biggest like concern right now in space policy that we need to address? Could it be something related to commercialization, or maybe finding a organization that can better oversee space guidelines? What do you think is like the biggest problem right now in space policy?
Mhm. I think one that really comes to mind for me is just the orbital debris issue, like you touched on. I think there's a lot of different components to it that are just really complicated. How do we incentivize businesses to like take care of any debris that is like belongs to them in space? How do we incentivize people to get rid of anything? How do we conduct any kind of on-orbit maneuvers that aren't seen as threats to other countries? There is just like such a complex like fountain of issues that relates to orbital debris that I think is making it really difficult for us to come to a solution as a country or even just like within businesses. And so I think that's one that's really at the forefront of the space industry because it does contribute to things like sustainability, our ability to continue to do launches in the future, what it means for the risk that it poses to other satellites and critical infrastructures in space. That's one that I think is going to have to be solved pretty soon before it really spirals out of control. And in many ways, it kind of already has gotten a little bit out of control. And I think that really plays into why I like space policy so much is because there are these really important questions that might not have been answered in similar industries before. The thing about space is because it belongs to everybody and because it is just this literal different like way for us to use any kind of infrastructure or use satellites or use launches as a resource for people, it also introduces these new complications and new problems that it's for us to solve. And so I think that hopefully, fingers crossed, we're able to really come up with a good system for orbital debris tracking and mitigation and removal soon, really soon.
Yeah, I really hope so too. I know that the European Space Agency is doing a lot of missions related to, clearing out space junk. So that's really good, and I hope NASA and other companies start taking that more seriously. But yeah, definitely, I agree with that point you're saying. And one thing I really wanted to mention when you were talking is, I think that your background is something that's very unique and brings in a unique perspective to space policy because you were mentioning how you were interested in physics and you have this really good foundational base of the science. You've worked in the science research area, but you're getting into this policy. And I think that makes you stand out because a lot of times I see people who study law, and then they go into space policy, but you're coming in from the science background, which I think is something that a lot of space policy enthusiasts kind of overlook sometimes. And I think you can definitely bring in a fresh perspective. I just kind of wanted to point that out because I noticed it while you were speaking.
Yeah, thank you. I think that in general, policy is a really great way for people from all different backgrounds to get involved because it really does mean that we need people who are really good at economics. We need people who are really good at communicating with the actual industry that we're dealing with. We need people who are good at understanding the political science of things. Like it is such a diverse melting pot of interests and backgrounds. And so I'm really fortunate to have multiple going into it. But I also think it's great because I'm like at the same time surrounded by so many people from so many different backgrounds, business, governance, all kinds of things.
Yeah, definitely. And the right word is melting pot, truly. I think, space policy, and space in general is really just a whole place for melting pot of innovation and creativity. And really thank you for bringing that point up. And so now that we kind of touched a little bit about your personal interests as well as kind of your journey of what got you into space policy, I usually end my podcast with one main question, which I wanted to ask you today. And whatever you said so far, you've given plenty of advice, which I really appreciate. But I wanted to kind of get one final, piece of advice from you. So my final question for you is, if you could kind of like travel back in time, pretend it's like a movie or something, you're able to travel back in time. I think it was Star Wars where it happened. Not too sure when someone was mentioning that, but I'm curious if you could go back in time and give advice to your younger self, say in like middle school and high school, and you're very young yourself. So like just imagine maybe like 5 or 6 years ago, if you could give advice to yourself, something related to space, STEM, really just any career, what advice would you give yourself?
I think something that really comes to mind for me that can help anybody, not only in STEM, but just any student ever, is just to read. I think it's so valuable to take advantage of different literature that exists about anything that you're passionate about. There is just so much information out there about anything you can possibly be interested in. And I think that that's one way for people to sort of have an equal playing field, regardless of what school you go to, regardless of what country you're from or how old you are or whatever. Like books can give you knowledge no matter who you are. And so I think that really, reading things in the news, reading things in articles, reading reports, reading papers, going to the library. I think that that is something that I wish I had done more often as a kid, but also since I have started doing has made it a lot easier for me to feel like I have connected with the space industry, even if I haven't taken a specific space policy class here, or even if there are some subjects that I'm less versed in. It's only like a few books or articles away for me to understand those things. And so I think that that is the most accessible form of information for people across the world that will make it easier and more fun for us to get involved in what we're passionate about and stay up to date with what's going on.
Yeah, I sometimes I look on social media and I'm like, wow, there's just so much information. I can't read all of it. But I definitely know that digitalization of like media and, having access to everything literally on the fingertips, with your phone or computer. I think it's, we have a great access to resources and we should really take advantage of them. Just kind of searching up topics you might be interested in. You never know where you could find an interesting research paper or you can find an interesting case. It doesn't necessarily have to be something super official. It could be like a YouTube video and just find different ways to engage yourself. I know there's a bunch of interesting podcasts out there that you could listen to while you're doing your homework or something and just kind of multitask. So I definitely know that there's just so many resources out there. It's just a matter of looking for them. And I really appreciate your advice, Ms. Jones, of, try to take advantage of those resources that are out there and make time for it because it might like spark some ideas in your own career, things you want to pursue, ideas, and, make you more knowledgeable as you get into these internship opportunities and career related goals. So I really want to thank you so much, Miss Jones, for like taking your time to share your journey. I definitely have to say, especially when you were sharing, how you got into space policy and how you're able to kind of find and take those steps forward to kind of pursue those career goals without having inbuilt track already put in place for you. I think that's very inspiring for students and for someone myself like who wants to do an unconventional path like aerospace medicine. It's really nice to see how it is possible to combine two different careers together, and really take it forward. So I want to thank you so much for your time today. I know I learned a lot and I will take a lot to me as I go to college next year. But so I want to thank you for all your time today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Goodika. I really appreciate your thoughtful questions. You're a great interviewer, and I think that your project is really amazing. So just keep doing what you're doing for all of these young kids out there, and I promise that you're going to go far in life.
Thank you so much.